The deeper you go into faith conversations, or better yet, theological conversations, the more you realize you have to be aware of a very important dynamic. Christians may share a common vocabulary, but just because we're using the same terms doesn't necessarily mean we're all saying the same thing.
Actually, two people can be using the exact same words, but have very different understandings of what those words mean. So, one of the most important parts of any conversation about faith or theology is to understand the definition of the words.
So, what does the word church mean for you?
It's a place where I can go, see my friends, and sing some of my favorite songs.
I've found that a perfect example of this is found in the word church. Believe it or not, the way church has been defined over the centuries has shifted and changed, and to this day, people can mean very different things when they use the word church. Interestingly enough, how one defines the word church will indicate to you a person's core convictions as a Christian, especially what they think the purpose of the church is.
The purpose of my church is to make me feel better when times are tough.
Excuse me for a moment.
Did I do something wrong?
Let's take a case in point using one of the most recognized moments in church history, the Reformation. A conversation about the Reformation naturally has to address what exactly it was that was being reformed. Of course, the answer is simple: the church. But this may not actually be as simple as it seems, because the way you define the church will determine whether or not it is something that can ever be reformed. So, before we can go any further in talking about the Reformation, we need to spend some time talking about the way Christians have defined and understood the church. History shows that from the time of the earliest apostles to today, that definition has evolved substantially. Naturally, the first place to look for a definition of the church is in the Scriptures, given that's where the concept originates. Now, it goes without saying that the Scriptures are not a dictionary. While some study Bibles may have a glossary of terms, a formal definition of the word church is not to be found. Rather, the Scriptures describe the church and give us words to depict what people understood the term to represent. Let's start with the person we traditionally understand to be the earliest author of the New Testament, the Apostle Paul. Pauline literature, as it's called, finds the Apostle Paul describing the church in 1 Corinthians as Christ's body. Later in 2 Corinthians, Paul writes about the church as Christ's bride and his temple. In what is commonly referred to as Deutero-Pauline texts, and that means letters that were likely not written by the Apostle Paul himself, but by his followers, we see similar language. In Colossians and Ephesians, the authors described the church as Christ's body, his bride, and his temple. Turning to the Gospels, interestingly, we find Jesus using the word in only two places. In Matthew 16, Jesus says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." The second time the word church, or ecclesia in the Greek, is used is also in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18. If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Obviously, in relation to the Pauline literature, the Gospels don't add much to our understanding of the word church, although they do make it clear that the church consists of a community of people. The book of Acts adds a little more by referring to the church 3 different times. In chapter 5 and 8, the whole church is identified with Jerusalem and is used in an Old Testament sense of an assembly or congregation of the Israelites. In chapter 19 of Acts, the Greek word ecclesia actually relates to a secular notion of an assembly, primarily of citizens in a self-governing city. The pastoral epistles too include the word ecclesia, or church. In 1 Peter 2:9, the priestly character of the church is identified in this way. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's own people, in order that you may proclaim the mighty acts of him who called you out of darkness into a marvelous light. And the book of Revelation uses the word church, but its description doesn't provide much more than what is found in the other parts of the New Testament. With all that said, it's apparent that the Bible offers no clear-cut definition for the word church. What we do find are numerous images describing or depicting the church. Of all the different images we see, they do have one thing in common: a gathering of individuals.
Wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name.
The ambiguity of the word church in the New Testament naturally led to a variety of ways people understood what the church is and how they applied the word. As a result, looking through the lens of history, we can find that the understanding and significance of the word church evolved as people used the term to describe the role and function of the Christian community.
Tune in next episode as Sarah dives deeper into the definition of the word church.
Yes. What he said. Thanks for watching. I'm sorry, who are you?
Well, if this was Shakespeare, which I'm thinking it's not, I would be considered the archetype of a fool, or to put it simply, a clever peasant commoner that uses its wits to undo the people of higher social standing.
So you're here to outdo me?
Well, if you think you're of higher social standing than me, we shall see. We shall see.